"Get her out of my house." The order sliced through the silence before Hannah Mitchell had even finished apologizing for the glass of water she had accidentally spilled across Adrian Romano's tailored shirt. Every guard reacted instantly, but Hannah stayed exactly where she was, clutching the empty tray with trembling hands. "If you're firing me because I spilled water on you," she said, forcing herself to meet the icy stare of the man in the wheelchair, "then at least finish yelling first." Nobody breathed. No one had ever answered Adrian Romano that way. Billionaire, ruthless businessman, secret ruler of one of the world's most feared mafia empires. Paralyzed after a devastating spinal injury, 6 caregivers had already failed him. Everyone expected the 7th to disappear. Instead, Adrian laughed. Why would the coldest man in the city laugh at the woman who had just made the biggest mistake of her career? The laughter lasted only a few seconds, but inside Romano Estate, it felt like history had changed. Every employee stared in disbelief. Some exchanged nervous glances, wondering whether they had imagined the sound altogether. Since Adrian's accident 6 months earlier, the mansion had become a place where conversations were whispered and footsteps were softened. His frustration hung over every hallway like a storm cloud. 6 professional caregivers had arrived with flawless resumes and polished confidence. None had lasted longer than a week. Hannah had managed to spill water on him within 5 minutes. By every logical standard, her employment should have ended before the paperwork was complete. Adrian wiped a sleeve across his damp shirt and looked at her with narrowed eyes. His laughter faded, replaced by the familiar expression everyone feared. "You're unusually calm," he observed. "I've already imagined getting fired at least 12 times since breakfast," Hannah admitted. "Reality can't be much worse." A few members of the security detail instinctively looked down, hiding smiles they dared not reveal. Adrian noticed. "So," he said slowly, "you embarrass yourself often?" "Professionally," she sighed. "Personally too, if I'm being completely honest." Another tiny laugh escaped him before he caught himself. For reasons he couldn't explain, her honesty felt strangely refreshing. Every specialist before her had entered his home, treating him like an impossible assignment. They watched every word, calculated every movement, and feared making mistakes. Hannah had already made several, and somehow she seemed less interested in protecting her reputation than in making sure he was comfortable. Threat. Liam Foster arrived moments later, expecting another resignation letter to prepare. Instead, Adrian simply said, "She stays." The physician blinked. "Are you certain?" I didn't stutter. Liam hid his surprise behind a professional nod, though relief quietly settled inside him. For months, he had searched for someone capable of reaching the patient beneath Adrian's carefully constructed walls. Perhaps technical perfection had never been what Adrian truly needed. Hannah spent the remainder of the morning learning the routines of the mansion. She memorized medication schedules, rehabilitation equipment, nutritional requirements, and emergency procedures. Then she walked directly into a half-open door. The dull thud echoed through the corridor. Several housekeepers gasped. Hannah rubbed her forehead before laughing at herself. Well, at least the door won. Even Adrian, watching from the end of the hallway, couldn't suppress the corner of his mouth lifting. Over the following days, the pattern continued. She dropped a stack of therapy bands. She nearly sat on a remote control. She confused his black coffee with her own decaffeinated cup before catching herself at the last second. Every mishap was followed by the same response. Not panic, not excuses, but an awkward smile and a determination to keep going. What surprised Adrian most wasn't her clumsiness. It was what happened afterward. She never treated him like a helpless patient. She spoke to him as though recovery was simply another difficult destination instead of an impossible dream. When he refused to attempt an exercise, she didn't lecture him. She asked about his favorite cities. When he ignored his meals, she quietly stayed in the room until curiosity pulled him into conversation. When pain darkened his mood, she acknowledged it without pity. The mansion slowly noticed something extraordinary. Doors no longer felt heavy. Staff members began speaking at a normal volume again. Even the security team found themselves smiling after overhearing Hannah's hopeless attempts to keep a straight face whenever she made another harmless mistake. The great Romano estate, once frozen by silence, had begun hearing laughter again. Daily rehabilitation began the following Monday. At precisely 8 o'clock every morning, Hannah wheeled Adrian into the private rehabilitation room overlooking the estate gardens. The room contained every piece of equipment money could buy, yet most of it had gathered dust over the previous months. Adrian had refused nearly every exercise his doctors suggested, convinced that hope was more painful than failure. As soon as Hannah positioned his wheelchair beside the parallel bars, he folded his arms. "I'm not doing it." She glanced at the schedule in her clipboard. "Wonderful." His eyebrows rose. "Wonderful." "I was worried today's plan looked too easy." He stared at her. "You think refusing therapy is easy?" "I think arguing with me burns fewer calories than exercising." One of the physical therapists coughed to hide a laugh. Adrian shot the man a look that immediately restored his professional posture. Hannah remained completely unfazed. She stepped toward the therapy bars, stretched dramatically, and announced, "Fine. Since you're not participating, I'll compete against myself." Before anyone could ask what she meant, she attempted to demonstrate a simple balance exercise. 3 seconds later, her shoelace caught beneath her own foot. She stumbled sideways, spun awkwardly, and somehow managed to catch herself by hugging one of the padded bars. Silence filled the room. Then Hannah raised a finger proudly. "I meant to test the safety equipment." Even Adrian shook his head. "You're unbelievable." "Thank you. That wasn't a compliment." "I'll take it anyway." For the first time since the accident, rehabilitation didn't feel like another reminder of everything Adrian had lost. It felt ridiculous and strangely entertaining. Over the next several days, Hannah quietly abandoned traditional motivational speeches. Instead, she transformed every therapy session into a game. If Adrian completed 5 arm repetitions, she would attempt to pronounce the names of expensive Italian dishes without embarrassing herself. If he finished 10 shoulder exercises, he could ask her one personal question. If he managed an entire stretching routine without complaining, she promised not to tell him the terrible joke she had prepared. Naturally, he complained. Constantly. "You changed the rules. You counted too fast. That repetition shouldn't qualify. My shoulder hurts." "My patience hurts," Hannah replied cheerfully. Yet here we both are. Their arguments became a daily performance. House staff passing outside the rehabilitation room often paused after hearing voices raised inside. At first, they feared another confrontation. Instead, they overheard exchanges that seemed impossible. "I refuse." "Too late. I already wrote your name on today's participation chart." "I don't care. You will when I decorate it with gold stars. I'm 43, and acting 14. Even Dr. Liam Foster noticed the difference. The therapy numbers remained modest, but Adrian was no longer skipping appointments. More importantly, he no longer spent every session staring at the floor. He argued, questioned, rolled his eyes, occasionally smirked. Those tiny reactions revealed something medicine alone never could. His mind had begun returning to life. One rainy afternoon, Hannah introduced what she proudly called the world's least impressive championship. The objective was simple. Adrian needed to transfer independently from his wheelchair to a therapy bench. If successful, he would earn 1 point. If unsuccessful, she would perform an embarrassing victory dance to celebrate trying anyway. This competition makes absolutely no sense, Adrian said. Exactly. He sighed. You'll dance either way, won't you? Almost certainly. After several determined attempts, his arms trembled violently beneath the effort. Halfway through the transfer, he lost balance. Before the nearby therapists could react, Hannah steadied him with practiced confidence. Not forcefully, not with pity, simply enough support to let him finish the movement himself. He settled onto the bench, breathing hard. You cheated, he muttered. I assisted. You touched my elbow. I saved your dignity. I didn't ask you to. No, she replied softly. You didn't have to. Something about her answer lingered in the room. She never made him feel weak for accepting help. She treated assistance as something temporary, not permanent. As they prepared to leave, Adrian noticed the clipboard lying open on the therapy table. Most of the page contained exercise notes. Near the bottom, however, Hannah had scribbled a sentence inside a small box. Today's goal isn't walking. Today's goal is believing tomorrow might be different. He read it twice before quietly closing the clipboard. He didn't mention it. Neither did she. The following morning, Adrian arrived in the rehabilitation room 5 minutes early. When Hannah entered carrying breakfast and therapy notes, she stopped in surprise. I thought you hated mornings. I still do. Then why are you here? He looked away before answering. I wanted to win in today's argument before you arrived. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the breakfast tray. Again. And although Adrian immediately pretended to regret speaking, the faint smile that followed betrayed him. Without realizing it, he had begun trying harder. Not because he suddenly believed in recovery, because every session with Hannah made it a little harder to surrender. The first breakthrough was so small that most people would have overlooked it. Dr. Liam Foster did not. 3 weeks into Hannah's assignment, Adrian completed an entire morning therapy session without asking to stop. His shoulders remained steadier during transfers, his grip strength had increased, and for the first time since his injury, faint muscle activity appeared in his lower back during electrical stimulation. The numbers were modest. The significance was enormous. Liam reviewed the latest scans twice before walking into Adrian's office. Your body is responding. Adrian barely looked up from the financial reports spread across his desk. It isn't enough. It wasn't responding at all a month ago. Silence settled between them. Finally, Adrian said quietly, Don't mistake improvement for recovery. Liam understood the fear behind the words. Hope had become dangerous. The higher someone hoped, the farther they could fall. That afternoon, Hannah found Adrian unusually quiet during therapy. No sarcastic comments today, she asked, while adjusting the resistance bands. I'm conserving energy. For rehabilitation? For surviving your motivational speeches? She gasped dramatically. I have speeches? You somehow turn breakfast into life philosophy. She pretended to think. I suppose pancakes are deeply symbolic. They're pancakes. They represent resilience. They represent syrup. She laughed so hard that she accidentally dropped the resistance band. It snapped upward and lightly bounced off her own forehead. She froze. Adrian stared. A heartbeat later, they both burst into laughter. One of the therapists standing nearby quietly smiled. Months earlier, that room had echoed with silence and frustration.
Now it sounded alive. As the weeks passed, the improvements continued. Adrian could remain upright longer without exhaustion. Transfers required less assistance. His upper body regained noticeable strength. Most importantly, he stopped viewing each exercise as punishment. Instead, he approached therapy like another strategic problem to solve. He even began asking questions. What muscle is this targeting? Why are we changing today's routine? How long until we increase resistance? Hannah answered each one patiently, never celebrating too early, and never allowing disappointment to linger after difficult days. Recovery isn't a straight road, she reminded him. It's more like me walking through a hallway. Dangerous, unpredictable, likely to collide with something, almost guaranteed. One evening, after finishing a particularly demanding session, Adrian remained in the rehabilitation room while Hannah organized the equipment. Without looking at her, he asked, "Why rehabilitation?" She paused. "No one's ever asked me that." "I'm asking now." She carefully folded a therapy towel before answering. "My father spent 2 years learning to walk again after a construction accident." Adrian turned toward her. "I was 16. Everyone focused on whether he'd ever walk." She smiled softly. "I focused on whether he'd ever laugh again." "And?" "He did." She placed another resistance band into its drawer. It happened long before he took his first step. Adrian listened without interrupting. "I realized something," Hannah continued. "Broken bodies aren't always the hardest part. Broken hope is." The room grew quiet. Adrian recognized the truth immediately, because he had spent months protecting himself from exactly that feeling. He had accepted paralysis more easily than vulnerability. Later that night, unable to sleep, Adrian found himself replaying the conversation. He realized something uncomfortable. He knew surprisingly little about Hannah. He knew she preferred tea over coffee because she spilled less of it. He knew she hummed softly while organizing therapy equipment. He knew she apologized to furniture after accidentally bumping into it. He knew every member of the household smiled more whenever she entered a room. But he knew almost nothing about the woman herself. The following morning, he noticed something else. She arrived wearing the same warm smile as always. Yet beneath it rested unmistakable exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She quickly adjusted her sleeves before greeting him. "Good morning. You barely slept." "I'm fine." He studied her expression. "You lied." She laughed lightly. "I didn't realize billionaires specialized in diagnosing fatigue. They specialize in observing people." She busied herself preparing the therapy equipment. "It's nothing." But Adrian had already noticed the hesitation whenever she caught her reflection in the glass doors. Later, while she spoke with Dr. Liam Foster outside the room, Adrian unintentionally overheard part of their conversation. "I'm sorry," Liam said gently. "You shouldn't let strangers get to you." "I'm trying not to. They're wrong." "I know." A brief silence followed. Then Hannah sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if people ever notice anything beyond my weight, or the fact that I'm always tripping over myself. They notice far more than that." "I hope so." She smiled, though her voice sounded less certain. "Some days I just forget." Adrian remained perfectly still inside the room. For weeks, she had filled his days with optimism, jokes, and unwavering patience. He had assumed confidence came naturally to her. Now he understood. Her humor wasn't proof that life had been easy. It was how she carried burdens without placing them on anyone else. When Hannah returned, she found Adrian waiting beside the therapy bars, without being asked, without complaint. She blinked in surprise. I thought today's session started in 10 minutes. It does. Then why are you already here? He reached for the parallel bars, determination replacing hesitation. I don't like wasting your time. The words were simple, yet for Hannah they meant more than another successful exercise. Because for the first time since they had met, Adrian Romano wasn't fighting rehabilitation simply because someone expected him to. He was fighting because someone believed he still had a future, and little by little, he was beginning to believe it too.
By early autumn, Adrian's progress had become impossible to ignore. He still relied on his wheelchair for most of the day, but he could now stand for brief moments with support. His physical therapist spoke cautiously about the possibility of walking again. Dr. Liam Foster refused to predict timelines, yet every new evaluation ended with a little more optimism than the last. The Romano Foundation decided to celebrate its annual charity gala with greater fanfare than ever. The event gathered hospital directors, influential business leaders, celebrities, and international donors beneath one glittering ballroom roof. Officially, the evening honored advances in rehabilitation medicine. Unofficially, it marked Adrian Romano's first major public appearance since his accident. Hannah had no desire to attend. She preferred therapy rooms to grand ballrooms and comfortable shoes to designer heels. But Adrian insisted that every member of his rehabilitation team be recognized. "You belong there," he told her. "I'm the one who carries the resistance bands." "Exactly." She laughed nervously. "I'll probably trip over the red carpet." "You probably will. And you're still inviting me." "I've accepted that accidents follow you." She rolled her eyes. I'm choosing to believe that was almost a compliment. It was. For once, neither of them joked afterward. The evening arrived with flashing cameras and endless applause. Adrian entered the ballroom, surrounded by executives and security personnel, his wheelchair moving confidently through rows of distinguished guests. Although he remained seated, his posture reflected the authority that had built both an international business empire and a hidden criminal organization feared across the world. When Hannah entered several minutes later, conversation noticeably shifted. She wore a simple navy blue evening dress that complemented her natural curves without trying to hide them. She had spent nearly an hour convincing herself to attend, only because she believed Adrian deserved to see familiar faces supporting him. Even so, she immediately felt out of place among tailored tuxedos and glamorous gowns. Isabella Vance noticed. Elegant as always, the foundation's director greeted donors with flawless grace before deliberately crossing the ballroom toward Hannah. "My goodness," Isabella said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You actually came." Hannah smiled politely. Mr. Romano invited the rehabilitation staff. How inclusive. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ignoring them, Isabella continued. "I assumed someone would explain the dress code." Hannah looked down at her gown. "I thought this was appropriate. For a hospital fundraiser?" Isabella tilted her head with a practiced smile. "Perhaps. For representing Adrian Romano." Her expression hardened. "Not quite." The surrounding conversations gradually quieted. People sensed something unpleasant unfolding. "You are undoubtedly kind," Isabella continued, "but appearances matter." She gestured lightly toward the crowd. "Mr. Romano is one of the most influential men in the world. He deserves elegance, poise, refinement." Her eyes slowly traveled over Hannah before returning to her face. Not someone remembered for knocking over coffee cups and stumbling into furniture. A few uncomfortable laughs escaped from distant guests who desperately wished to avoid becoming involved. Each one landed like another bruise. Hannah felt heat rise into her cheeks. For a brief moment, she considered defending herself. Instead, she remembered every patient who had once trusted her with their most vulnerable days. She straightened her shoulders. "I'm sorry if my presence embarrasses you." Isabella smiled. I'm relieved you understand. Hannah simply nodded. I hope the evening raises a great deal of money for the foundation. Without another word, she quietly turned and walked toward the nearest exit. No dramatic confrontation, no tears, no angry speech. Just quiet dignity. From across the ballroom, Adrian had witnessed every second. He had been speaking with investors when he noticed Hannah standing alone. Then he saw Isabella approach. He couldn't hear every word. He didn't need to. He recognized Hannah's expression immediately. It was the same brave smile she wore whenever strangers judged her before knowing her. By the time Hannah reached the entrance hall, Adrian had already ended his conversation. Ignoring surprised executives, he wheeled himself toward the exit as quickly as he could. His security team hurried behind him. Outside, Hannah stood beneath the evening lights, taking slow breaths. She heard the wheelchair before she saw him. You left. She turned. I didn't want to cause trouble. You didn't. His voice remained calm. Someone else did. She attempted another smile. It's only words. No. Adrian's eyes never left hers. It was cruelty, disguised as sophistication. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Hannah laughed softly, though sadness lingered beneath the sound. I suppose Isabella isn't entirely wrong. I am clumsy. I don't exactly fit into glamorous charity galas. Adrian answered without hesitation. Do you know what everyone inside that ballroom has been discussing tonight? She shook her head. They've been congratulating me for fighting to recover. He looked directly at her. None of them know the person who convinced me recovery was worth fighting for. Hannah's eyes glistened. Before she could respond, the ballroom doors opened again. Several board members appeared, searching anxiously for Adrian. They found something none of them expected. The feared Mafia boss wasn't angry about a failed business deal. He wasn't negotiating contracts. He wasn't protecting his reputation. He was furious because someone had humiliated the woman who had quietly rebuilt his hope. And for the first time since his accident, his anger had become deeply, unmistakably personal. The following morning, Romano Global Holdings woke to rumors. By noon, they had become certainty. Every executive, board member, and foundation director received an urgent notice requiring immediate attendance at a special meeting. No explanation accompanied the invitation. Those who knew Adrian Romano well understood exactly what that meant. Something significant had happened. Inside the executive conference room, silence settled long before Adrian arrived. Isabella Vance entered with perfect composure, convinced the previous evening had merely removed an embarrassing distraction from Adrian's life. In her mind, she had protected the Romano name from unnecessary ridicule. When the doors finally opened, every person in the room stood. Adrian rolled to the head of the table, accompanied only by Dr. Liam Foster. No assistants, no speeches, no greetings. He placed a single folder on the polished table. I've reviewed yesterday's security recordings. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Isabella remained calm. I'm pleased to hear the Foundation's event received such careful attention. It did. Adrian's voice carried no emotion. So did your behavior. The room became perfectly still. He pressed a button on the conference monitor. Without dramatic editing or commentary, the surveillance footage replayed Isabella's conversation with Hannah exactly as it had happened. Every insult, every carefully disguised humiliation, every smile intended to wound. No one interrupted. When the recording ended, the silence felt heavier than before. Adrian slowly looked around the table. Our foundation exists for one purpose: to restore dignity to people facing life's greatest challenges. His eyes settled on Isabella. You used its stage to destroy someone else's. She opened her mouth. I was protecting your reputation. My reputation? He leaned slightly forward. The woman you mocked has spent months protecting something far more valuable. My will to live. The words struck the room harder than anyone expected. Several board members lowered their eyes. Even those unaware of Adrian's emotional journey understood they were witnessing something deeply personal. Isabella attempted one final defense. With respect, Adrian, appearances matter. They always have. You deserve someone polished, someone sophisticated, someone worthy of standing beside a man of your position. Adrian answered without raising his voice. I have spent my entire life surrounded by polished people. He paused. Very few possessed genuine kindness. His gaze never left hers. Hannah Mitchell walks into walls. She spills coffee. She apologizes to furniture. Soft laughter escaped several executives before immediately fading. But every room she enters becomes kinder. Every patient believes tomorrow is possible because she refuses to stop believing first. He closed the folder. As of this moment, you are removed as director of the Romano Foundation. Shock swept across the room. Effective immediately, Isabella's confidence finally cracked. You can't dismiss years of my work because of one caregiver. No, Adrian replied evenly. I'm dismissing you because you forgot the purpose of the foundation you were trusted to lead. Security personnel quietly stepped forward. Without another argument, Isabella gathered her belongings and left the room. No one spoke until the doors closed behind her. Then Adrian looked toward the remaining board members. If anyone here believes compassion weakens leadership, you are free to resign today. Nobody moved. The meeting ended minutes later. Yet Adrian found himself thinking about only one person, Hannah. He expected to find her preparing afternoon therapy. Instead, Dr. Liam Foster approached him outside the rehabilitation room, carrying a sealed envelope. She asked me to give you this. Adrian frowned. What is it? I think you should read it yourself. He opened the envelope. The first line tightened something inside his chest. Letter of resignation. He read every word in silence. Hannah thanked him for trusting her. She expressed gratitude for the opportunity to witness his recovery. She apologized if her presence had ever complicated his public image. She insisted his progress no longer depended on her. She believed another caregiver could guide him the rest of the way. At the bottom, she had written one final sentence. You deserve a future without someone constantly making accidental messes around you. Adrian stared at the page for several long moments. Then he folded it carefully. Not once, twice, before placing it back into the envelope. He wheeled himself through the mansion until he found Hannah packing therapy manuals into a storage box. She looked up with an uncertain smile. I hoped Liam would explain. He did. He held up the envelope. I won't sign it. She blinked. You haven't even read the reasons. I read all of them. They're wrong. She lowered her eyes. After last night, everyone saw exactly what Isabella meant. I don't belong in your world. You belong exactly where you've been since the day you arrived. She shook her head. I'm becoming a distraction. No, you became the reason I stopped giving up. The words hung quietly between them. Hannah felt tears threaten, but she quickly looked away. You don't owe me your future. I know, Adrian answered. I'm choosing it. For the first time since his accident, the fearless Mafia boss found himself struggling to express something business negotiations had never required. Gratitude. Trust. Need. He took a slow breath. When 6 experts failed, you stayed. When I refused therapy, you came back the next morning. When I believed my life was over, you never argued. You simply acted as if tomorrow still existed. He extended the resignation letter toward her. Then, deliberately, he tore it cleanly in half. And then again, the pieces slipped quietly into the nearby wastebasket. There, his voice softened. Problem solved. Hannah couldn't stop the laugh that escaped through her tears. You know that's not how paperwork works. No, he finally smiled. But it's how hope works. For the first time, neither of them looked away. Neither realized they had already crossed the invisible line between patient and caregiver, not through dramatic declarations, not through impossible promises, but through countless ordinary days in which two wounded people had quietly begun saving each other.
Winter arrived quietly, carrying with it a rhythm no one inside Romano Estate would have believed possible just a few months earlier. Rehabilitation was no longer something Adrian endured. It had become part of his life. Every morning began the same way. Hannah arrived carrying breakfast in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Almost every morning she nearly dropped one of them. One particularly memorable day, she managed to save the tray, lose her balance, spin in an awkward circle, and somehow end up sitting on the rehabilitation mat with a look of complete confusion. Adrian watched the entire performance. "I've been analyzing that technique," he said with perfect seriousness. "Oh?" "I've concluded gravity likes you a little too much." She laughed. "I prefer to think gravity is emotionally attached." The security guards outside the room smiled to themselves. Months ago, they had dreaded every therapy session. Now they quietly competed to guess which one of Hannah's harmless accidents would happen next. Even Adrian had begun waiting for them. Not because he enjoyed seeing her embarrassed, because every clumsy moment reminded him that perfection had never been the reason she changed his life. She simply refused to stop showing up. As Adrian's strength returned, therapy became increasingly demanding. Standing exercises lasted longer. Weight-bearing drills grew more challenging. His legs, once almost completely unresponsive, slowly remembered movements they had forgotten. Progress remained painfully slow. Some mornings brought improvement. Others brought frustration. On difficult days, Adrian's temper occasionally resurfaced. One afternoon, his knees buckled halfway through a standing exercise. Before Hannah could steady him, he lowered himself back into the wheelchair with visible anger. "This is pointless." "It isn't. I've been doing this for months." "Yes, and I'm still counting seconds instead of steps." She knelt until they were at eye level. "Do you remember your first therapy session?" "I remember refusing to participate." "You also couldn't transfer to the bench without nearly exhausting yourself." He remained silent. "Today you stood for almost 90 seconds. 90 seconds isn't walking." "No." She smiled gently. "But 90 seconds used to be impossible." He looked away. "I hate needing help." "I know. I hate feeling weak." "I know. I hate disappointing everyone." This time Hannah answered immediately. "You're not." She reached into her therapy bag and removed something unexpected. A small notebook. Its pages were worn from constant use. "I've never shown this to you." Adrian accepted it curiously. Each page contained handwritten notes, not medical charts, not treatment schedules. Victories. Day 3, Adrian agreed to finish breakfast. Day 8, first genuine laugh. Day 15, completed every exercise without leaving the room. Day 24, asked his first rehabilitation question. Day 41, smiled at her housekeeper. Day 56, encouraged another patient during hospital evaluation. The entries continued for months. Some described physical achievements. Many did not. Adrian slowly turned another page. Day 97. Stopped calling himself broken. His throat tightened. "I don't remember saying that." "You stopped saying it." She smiled. That mattered more. He closed the notebook carefully. "You've been recording all of this?" "I promised myself I'd remember every victory." especially the ones you couldn't see. For several moments, neither spoke. Outside, snow drifted quietly beyond the tall windows. Inside, something heavier than silence settled between them. Gratitude. A few weeks later, Dr. Liam Foster adjusted Adrian's rehabilitation plan one final time. The next phase won't be easy, he warned. It will probably be the hardest yet. Adrian nodded. When do we start? Liam smiled. That's the first time you've ever asked me that. The final stage focused on independent standing and assisted walking. Parallel bars became Adrian's daily battlefield. Each attempt demanded enormous concentration. Each step required muscles that had spent months relearning their purpose. Hannah remained beside him every time. Never pulling, never dragging, only close enough to catch him if necessary. One cold morning, after nearly 4 months of relentless therapy, Adrian wrapped both hands around the parallel bars. His breathing slowed. The room fell completely silent. House staff quietly gathered outside the doorway. Even security personnel paused their rounds. Everyone sensed something important. Ready? Hannah asked softly. No. She smiled. Good. Neither am I. He laughed. That tiny laugh eased the tension. Then he pushed upward. His arms trembled. His legs shook violently beneath him. Pain crossed his face. For one terrifying second, it seemed he would collapse. But he didn't. Instead, he stood. Not for seconds. For nearly an entire minute. No one spoke. Dr. Liam Foster discreetly wiped moisture from the corner of one eye. Hannah's own hands trembled, though she never reached toward Adrian. She knew he wanted this moment to belong entirely to him. Finally, Adrian whispered, I think my legs remember. They do. Hannah's voice cracked. They've been trying to tell you that for months. Several days later came the moment no medical chart could have predicted. Supported only by a single cane and Hannah walking beside him, Adrian prepared to leave the parallel bars for the first time. One step, then another. Slow, unsteady, painful, yet undeniably real. The entire rehabilitation team watched in absolute silence. Halfway across the room, Adrian stopped. Everyone assumed he needed to rest. Instead, he slowly turned away from the therapist waiting ahead. Away from Dr. Foster. Away from the applause already beginning behind him. He looked only at Hannah. She stood several feet away, tears filling her eyes. Without a word, Adrian changed direction. Each step demanded every ounce of determination he possessed. His legs trembled. His breathing grew ragged. Still he continued. Toward her. Only her. When he finally reached her, neither of them spoke immediately. Hannah instinctively reached out, afraid he might lose balance. Instead, Adrian gently took both of her hands. I thought, he said quietly, struggling to steady both his voice and his breathing, that my first steps should lead to the person who never stopped believing I'd take them. Tears slipped freely down Hannah's cheeks. You did this? He shook his head. No. You taught me something far more important. She whispered, What? Adrian smiled, a smile no one inside Romano Estate would ever forget. Walking wasn't the miracle. Wanting to live again was. The room erupted into applause, yet neither of them noticed. For the first time since fate had brought them together, the wheelchair that had once symbolized despair stood quietly behind them. And in front of them, a completely new future had just taken its first steps. 8 months later, very little inside Romano Estate looked the same. The hallways no longer echoed with whispered conversations. Employees laughed openly during lunch breaks. Fresh flowers appeared in windows that had remained bare for years. Even the security guards, once famous for their intimidating expressions, had somehow developed the habit of smiling whenever Hannah walked past. No one questioned why. She had changed the atmosphere long before Adrian ever took his first step. Adrian Romano had returned to work. Officially, he was once again the commanding CEO of Romano Global Holdings, traveling between boardrooms, international conferences, and corporate negotiations with the same brilliant strategic mind that had built his empire. Unofficially, he had also resumed quietly leading the powerful Mafia organization that depended upon his judgment. The criminal empire still feared his decisions. The business world still respected his intelligence. Neither world knew the greatest battle he had ever won had taken place inside a rehabilitation room. He walked confidently now. Not perfectly. Long meetings occasionally left stiffness in his back, and difficult days reminded him that recovery was an ongoing journey rather than a finished destination. But every step he took carried something impossible to measure. Hope. One Monday morning, Adrian entered the executive dining room, carrying his own breakfast. The entire staff froze. Months earlier, they had delivered every meal directly to his office because he refused interruptions. Now he simply sat near the window. 5 minutes later, Hannah hurried inside, carrying her therapy notebook. She was no longer his full-time caregiver. Officially, she served as his rehabilitation consultant, visiting several mornings each week to monitor his long-term recovery plan. Unofficially, she still worried about him constantly. "You skipped your stretching routine yesterday," she said, before even sitting down. Adrian looked genuinely surprised. "Good morning to you too. You also worked until nearly midnight." "I had meetings." "You had excuses." One executive quietly hid a smile behind his coffee cup. Another whispered, "Here we go." Hannah folded her arms. "Did you eat lunch?" "Eventually." "Define eventually." "There was food." "Adrian, there may have been coffee." She sighed dramatically. "You are impossible." "And yet," Adrian replied with the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly how this conversation would end, "you're still here." She rolled her eyes. "I ask myself why every single day." Before she could continue, her sleeve brushed against a spoon. It clattered loudly onto the floor. The entire table looked toward her. Hannah closed her eyes. "It's where the furniture plans these things." The room burst into warm laughter. Adrian bent down, picked up the spoon before anyone else could move, and handed it back to her. Months ago, she had been the one constantly helping him. Now the gesture came naturally in the opposite direction. No one mentioned it. No one needed to. Later that afternoon, several long-time employees watched Adrian and Hannah walking through the estate gardens together. Their pace was slow. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the quiet. One younger accountant smiled. "So, who actually saved whom?" The question drifted farther than intended. Adrian heard it. He stopped walking and looked back toward the group. For a brief moment, everyone expected another dry joke. Instead, Adrian answered with complete sincerity. "I thought I hired someone to help me walk." His eyes found Hannah. A gentle smile softened the strength that had once intimidated entire boardrooms. Instead, she taught me how to live again. Silence followed. Not the heavy silence that had once filled the mansion. This one was peaceful. Hannah lowered her head, embarrassed by the attention. "You make it sound like I performed miracles." Adrian chuckled. "You did. I spilled water on you." "You did. I walked into at least 4 doors. Closer to 7. I dropped your medical charts. You apologized to the charts. She laughed. I still think they deserved it. So do I. Their eyes met. Nothing dramatic needed to be said. The slow, quiet love that had grown through patience, trust, laughter, and healing had already spoken for them. It had never begun with grand declarations. It began with a woman brave enough to stay after making the most embarrassing mistake of her career, and with a man courageous enough to laugh when everyone expected anger. People often search for miracles in extraordinary places. In reality, miracles sometimes arrive wearing comfortable shoes, carrying therapy notes, and accidentally bumping into door frames. Sometimes they appear disguised as patience, sometimes as kindness, sometimes as a person who refuses to let someone else surrender. Because the greatest miracles are rarely about standing up after a devastating fall. They are about believing life is still worth living long before the first step is ever taken. For Adrian Romano and Hannah Mitchell, recovery was never simply the story of a man learning to walk again. It was the story of two wounded hearts discovering that healing becomes possible the moment someone chooses to stay.